Welcome to the Boswell Book Company and Books and Company virtual event series. It is day 4,480 of Boswell Being in Business. We are so honored to welcome back Christina Clancy, who is the author of Shoulder Season as well as The Second Home. Her new novel just came out 2 days ago and everybody is loving it. It is a sexy, evocative tale drenched in longing and desire that captures a fleeting moment in American history with nostalgia and heart. It is a love letter to East Troy, if I ever read one. And it is also set in Lake Geneva, which we'll hear more about. Clancy's writing has appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, and Chicago Tribune, and journals like Glimmer Train, Pleiades, and Hobart. She holds a PhD creative writing from UW-Milwaukee and lives in Madison and several other places. Liam Callanan is our beloved conversation partner, the author of Paris by the Book and the novels Cloud Atlas and All Saints, and the short story collection Listen. And I just want to mention once again that joining us is Lisa Bedoin from Books and Company, who may help with the questions if her internet shows up, but otherwise I will send links to purchase signed copies, real signed copies, not tip-ins, not book plates from either Boswell or Books and Company. And with that, I want to welcome Liam Callanan and Christina Clancy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am going to have to turn it over to Liam, who is joining us apparently from Boswell. I don't know how you do it.
I don't know. It's just part of the Boswell magic. I'm very excited to be here tonight to welcome Christy back to Boswell, which I have carefully constructed in the confines of my own virtual space here. So it's exciting to have her here. I'm looking forward to her next 5 books, which we will welcome in store and which will probably, at the amazing rate of production that she's done, will come out in the next year or so. I could not be more proud of her as her former teacher at UWM and offer her the greatest compliment, which our teachers want to give so much and so rarely able to, but she is someone that I learn from every day and learn from the very beginning. She's the person who welcomed me to Milwaukee, and so I'm very proud to welcome her to the launch of this beautiful book tonight. Congratulations, Christy.
Thank you, Liam. I'm so happy to be here.
So I think there's a Bucks game coming up tonight, and several people have asked me to make sure that our event goes right through it. So what we've booked, I think the agenda Chris and I worked out, it's going to be about 3 or 4 hours of solid reading. And then we're going to go back and do it again in case people missed that first one. What we might actually do, though, is tweak that a little bit. But in all seriousness, I was going to have Christy read a little bit at the top, just to kind of get the author's voice in the room. And then I have some questions that I've dreamed up for her that I've always wanted to ask about this beautiful book and the rest of her writing life. And then we're going to throw it open to the floor to ask questions. And I'm going to rely on Lisa and Daniel to moderate those questions as their technology is a little bit more sophisticated than mine. So if everyone thinks that's great, just nod invisibly to me. Great, that sounds good. Christy, are you ready, or do you need more of a drum roll?
No, I am ready. Thank you. And I'm reading from a section that is about East Troy. I don't think there are any spoilers, but we're going to jump kind of to the middle where Sherry, my protagonist, who's a young woman from East Troy who becomes a bunny, and you'll learn a lot about Sherry. She's at Booth Lake with her friend Roberta. And this kind of gives you a sense, but part of what I wanted to write the book about is what I think is this amazing town of East Troy and these beautiful lakes. So hopefully this kind of comes through in this section. So I won't spend very long. I know it's hard to listen to long readings on Zoom events. So the public beach was empty. It wouldn't open for another week, not until Memorial Day. It's shoulder season. So far, only the high dive had been put in, and it looked strange out there alone in the deep end without swarms of people scrambling to take turns jumping off. The restrooms were still locked up, and the candy store on the first floor of the simple city-style house built into the dandelion-covered hill next to the beach was shuttered. All summer long, kids would stand in line after swim lessons, wet and shivering, with quarters clutched tightly in their little fists. They'd buy Laffy Taffy, bazooka gum, candy cigarettes, or ice cream push-ups to eat on the bus that would drop them back off at the square. One summer, Roberta figured out how to insert tweezers into her mother's piggy bank, and she loaded up with loose change that she willingly shared with Sherry. It was fun until Roberta's father found out and whopped her backside with a hairbrush. After talking about Lake Beulah with Arthur, Sherry found it hard not to compare the lakes. Beulah was farther from town and much bigger and more prestigious than Booth. It was really 3 lakes merged together with channels that were dug through the land that separated them. But that lake, much as Sherry loved it, had a quality of otherness because it felt like it belonged to the Chicagoans. Poor man's Lake Geneva was what people called it, but it was still too rich for the townies. A state representative lived there, and so did families with names like Gillette, and the people who'd built railroads and bridges all over the world. It was the home of sailors and spoiled kids who filled up the churches in summer when Sherry would look around and not recognize a soul. Booth Lake was much smaller and simpler and sweeter, even if a lake could be sweet. It had a Girl Scout camp on one side and simple cottages dotting the shoreline, and a small island with a cabin on it sat smack dab in the middle. She felt this lake belonged to her. Actually, with Roberta standing next to her, she felt like it was theirs. The very best part of their childhoods had happened there. On one end of the beach sat the raft. Only the teenagers went on it, and couples would sneak underneath it to make out in the airspace between the wood and the empty barrels, while the adults, oblivious, sat on blankets or on tattered folding chairs chatting with neighbors about farm subsidies and corn futures, whose kid did what with whom, and the annuals they'd planted in their gardens. Roberta walked over to the big and little slides, set sideways on sand on the opposite side of the beach from the raft, staged to be put into the lake next. Do you think Walter's finger is still in there? Sherry pretended to make herself vomit. That was so disgusting. When they were kids, Walter Dugan, goofing around as always, had tried sliding sideways and gripped the rusty undersides of the handrail, catching his index finger on an errant bit of metal as he slid down. When he'd surfaced, he looked at his hand and screamed bloody murder. He'd bled so much, everyone thought he would die. For years after that, the kids would plug their noses and swim upside down, saying they were looking for Walter's finger, or they'd make up ghost stories to tell around the campfire about the finger gripping the ankles of swimmers and pulling them into the depths of the spring-fed lake. I wish we'd brought our suits, Roberta said. She wore a baseball cut t-shirt and cutouts and still had a glob of syrup stuck in her hair from her job as a waitress. I know, I'll bet the water is freezing. In summer, Sherry and Roberta were always the first in the water and the last to emerge, the skin on their hands and the bottoms of their feet shriveled like raisins. They used to escape the roped area and swim to the island or furtively sneak around Camp Alice Chester, pretending to be Girl Scouts, even getting free lunch in the cafeteria a few times. One summer, the camp had installed a new fiberglass pier, and the girls decided to sunbathe on it, ignoring the keep off signs. They had ended up with tiny shards of glass all over their skin that itched and burned like crazy. The stillness of the lake made Sherry ache to be in it and swim the way they did when they were kids, not the way adults swam at the resort, afraid to get their hair wet, doing the stupid half breaststroke.
Wow. So thank you, Christy. So one of my jobs as a moderator here is not just to keep the conversation going, but to make you all want to buy the book. And I'm just going to sit down because, like, what could not make you want to buy the book that you haven't already heard? That was gorgeous. There's so much gorgeous prose. There's a magic word apostrophe, which I'll just say is in the very beginning that you have to read that sentence to just appreciate it. But that was just spectacular. This book is immersive in every respect. And I think that, and I will say, actually, just to do my job for a second, has already put the link in the chat. You don't have to wait for the end of our discussion today or till the Bucks win in 5. You can go ahead and buy that book right now. You got to do something between watching all these games. So please do that. But in the meantime, Christy, could you tell us, I love that you start there because this is, as I wrote to you earlier this week, you're such a poet of place and you've established that now over the course of 2 books. And I know there's a 3rd germinating that way. Can you tell us about this wonderfully crafted world? Because I think for a lot of us who live in Southeastern Wisconsin, this is a story that was hidden in plain sight. A lot of us didn't know about this. And so I'm really curious to hear from you. What was the seed of this novel and what sort of research did you do once you had found that seed?
Well, I've known for years that I wanted to write about Lake Beulah. We spend a lot of time there, and my husband John's family is from East Troy, so they've we've spent all of our summers going to visit John's parents, who had a place on Booth Lake, and then John's parents also had a cabin in a different part of Booth Lake while he was growing up, and John's grandfather and great grandfather owned the hardware store on the square. So I've always felt really attached to East Troy, and I've loved hearing my father-in-law, Larry Clancy's stories that he would tell about living there. So I wanted to tell some sort of story, but I just didn't know where. And I'm haunted by lakes, and I wanted to have something that had to do with the lakes, either Lake Beulah or Booth Lake. But there's a line in the book where someone says lakes have a memory. And I feel that every time I'm in a lake. I feel like it holds things in it, and you're just kind of part of that. So I wanted to have a family that was on the lake, on Lake Beulah, and I tried to think, well, why would they be there? And the mother was about 60, and I thought maybe she was a Playboy bunny at the old Playboy resort. So it really started innocently with me wanting to tell a totally different story. And then I started talking to some friends who had, it's not very hard to find people who had been at the resort. And one really great thing about writing about the Playboy bunnies is that everybody has such fond memories of going to the Playboy resort, either as kids or as patrons, as adults. And so they love talking about it. And I started talking to this woman named Pam Ellis, who hopefully she's on the call, but she worked at the resort for 4 years. And I just learned the most fascinating things about life there as a bunny. And pretty soon that became my novel. I just thought this is so much more interesting, like setting the novel mostly in the resort, because I learned it was a family resort. It was not at all like the way we think of Playboy. It wasn't, those clubs, pictures that we have of Hefner standing with like women on either arm in front of the grotto wearing his stained, smoking jacket. That was kind of in my mind. But then when I went to the Playboy resort and talked to people, it's now called the Grand Geneva. But when I talked to people there, I found out it was a totally different experience. So the story just kind of took off from there. And I created Sherry Taylor, who's my protagonist. And I wanted someone who was very emotionally stunted, who gets a job and gets in way over her head.
I'm curious if I was just about to ask you what your biggest surprise was. And so it sounds like your biggest surprise was that it was a family oriented resort, but were there things did you do all your research before you started writing, or did you just dig into it and then research as you went along?
Well, I was on a pretty tight timeline. I had a 2-book contract, so I had to write this book in just over a year. So I did a lot of research up front, but I also just had to start writing, which I think was helpful because I've talked to a lot of writer friends who say that they could just research forever, and at a certain point, you never actually write the book. You just go down all these rabbit holes. So for me, it was nice to have a timeline. And then when I'd get stuck, I would call like mostly Pam or talk to other people. And it was great being in East Troy a lot because I could always just, go hang out on the square at 2894 on Main, which is the restaurant there, and just run into people and ask questions if I got stuck. But it helped generate the book. Every time I'd talk to someone, it would make me want to write more about what I was learning.
I've talked to other historical novelists who talk about all the research they do, and then some of them have a common wish, like if they could go back in time to one day or one place, if they just had to choose like one place. I remember Michael Chabon talking about Cavalier and Clay, and he said if he could only walk down Broadway for just one afternoon during the height of the comic book era, then he would know what everything smelled like. If you could go back in time to one day or one place or one thing, what remains out there that you really wanted to kind of latch on to?
I think mostly just to walk into the resort when it was really in full swing, like some summer day when everybody's working and the bunnies are having fun and people are in the different clubs. And I would hear about the different rooms that people would go to. They had different like the VIP room and the Playmate bar and the club and the sidewalk cafe. And the bunny hutch, which was actually like an outdoor disco area where people could dance by the pool. But in my head, I think I almost just invented a lot of that because I had to imagine what it must have been like. But I wish I could just smell the cigarette smoke and the chlorine and and just hear the clinking of ice in the glasses and the hushed sound of conversation. And it just sounded so fun.
That's it. Well, I mean, I could smell the cigarette smoke after this book. I had to kind of like lean back after a while, and, like cough a little because it was that vivid. Another thing that was vivid for me, and I think that's something that you really do well in this book and elsewhere, but particularly in this book, is talk about friendship. And I was wondering if you could take a moment to talk about the role that friendship plays in this book, not just friendship, but female friendship. Because for Sherry, and I don't think this is spoiling too much to say that it's kind of the source of all of her strength, but it's also in some ways a cause of a lot of friction in her life.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sherry's one of those people who in school never fit into any real group. She kind of circulated, on the outside, and she had one really good friend, but then she felt betrayed by that friend. Like that friend got popular and she didn't. and her friends still kind of looked out for her, and they were close with families and stuff. But I think they kind of lost a sense of togetherness. And I think Sherry, she really wants to be able to connect with her, and there's resentment that she can never quite voice to Roberta about how Roberta had kind of let her down. And I think a lot of readers finish the book thinking Roberta's, this great person. And but I think Roberta also did not, she wasn't there for Sherry when she needed her. And I think that was really hard for her because Sherry was alone taking care of her mom a lot when she was in high school. So I had a lot of empathy for Sherry and how she must have felt. But I also felt like with Roberta, even though we don't know exactly why she wasn't that great a friend to Sherry, I wanted to hint that she had things going on in her own life that maybe you don't tell everything to your friend.
Right.
And then it was fun for Sherry when she started working as a bunny, because, what I found from talking to all the different bunnies is that they came from all different walks of life. Most of them started working there because they had, maybe they had to help support their families. Maybe their dad was a dairy farmer and they, just wanted to do something different. But they all had their reasons for being there. And they, one of them was from Oconomowoc. I wanted to tell Lisa that. They call it the 5 O's. But they really were drawn from small towns, just like Sherry. So she wasn't really thrown together with bunnies who were really different than she was. She was thrown together with bunnies who were the same. And so she found a whole new form of sisterhood when she was working at the resort.
The resort and East Troy and the other fields and the communities in the book are very, again, this is something that you've done now over the course of 2 books, and you do it really well. But I wonder if you could speak to the kind of unique nature of these communities. They're not just any place. It's not just, and even the club, it's not just any Playboy club. They're very unique, and I feel like there's some. Would you say there's something about them that that causes plot and friction to result? Like they're very compact, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I was wondering what your goal was in making such kind of not completely inward focused. They definitely know what's going on in the world around them, but it seems to be like you're really interested in seeing about the bonds that pull a community together and what happens when those bonds pull a little too tight.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, just like speaking of East Troy, that I'm struck with is that they have a square. Like McGuanago, this is no slight to McGuanago, but they got rid of their square and now there's a Walgreens and a road that goes right through that town. But in East Troy, they have a legitimate square with a bandshell in the middle of it. And it's become kind of a new thing. Like there's new businesses opening up. They've really fixed it up. East Troy could have become maybe like a Walmart community, but instead it really kept the square as this vital, interesting, fun place. And so I think I was drawn to the sense that there's an organizing principle to the community of East Troy, and that it has a heartbeat and a vortex. And so as Sherry goes to work at the resort, she's kind of like a satellite always from East Troy. Even 40 years later, when she moves to California and she's working eventually in Palm Springs, she's still totally drawn to this center, which is in East Troy. But like so many people who come from small towns, she rejects it, when she's younger. She thinks there's something better somewhere else. It made me a little nervous writing this book because I didn't want people to read it and think I was bashing East Troy. I was just trying to see it through Sherry's eyes, when she was younger. But I do think it's really just my friends who are from East Troy. Every single time I get together and talk to them, I just love their stories. They had the best childhoods. They got to swim all the time and ride their bikes all around town, and they knew everybody and everybody knew them. And I think that they're so fortunate and lucky to have had that. And it's, our world's so fragmented now. Everyone's on their phone, families live far away from each other, and East Troy still feels kind of like it still holds together in a way.
Absolutely. I grew up in Los Angeles and I wanted to move to East Troy by the end of this book, given even all the things that happened there. And all the things that happened there allows me to kind of segue into my next question. And then I am going to give up the mic as much as not entirely, I have a couple more questions, but I know a lot of other people do too. But I wanted to ask about, and I'm not going to spoil them, but I wanted to ask about the role of secrets in this book. This book is deliciously full of secrets. And again, readers, if you haven't gotten your copy, you're going to have to get one because I'm not going to spill any beans other than to say there's a lot of twists and turns and you got to stay in your seat until the end of the book before you find out everything that happens. My question is, it's a little bit of a writer question, a little bit of a reader question, which is, did you have all the secrets in mind when you sat down and started writing the book, or did the book secrets arise even for you? Were you surprised by what uncovered along the way?
Oh, I have the most frustrating writing process where I do not like to know where a book is going ahead of time. I do not outline it. That's not to say that I have little ideas of where I want it to go, but when I was working on this book, I was like, let's just see what happens. Let's go with it. And what was really helpful actually when I wrote The Second Home and I sold it, my editor, Sarah Canton, she's just super smart and brilliant. She said, the first thing she said, before I give you your edit letter, go back and just revise the last third because you should have more twists and turns, more secrets. I kind of could see you wanting to just get to the end and figure out what was going to happen to the Gordon's house by the end. And maybe, have some more diversions along the way. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, readers like secrets. I can do secrets. And I went back and I just had so much fun revising it. And that was really great to have in my head while I was working on my second book, because I thought, just be mindful, like it's okay to insert twists and turns. And I gave myself the freedom to do that. And it was, but it's fun for me too when I write. I don't know if it's Flannery O'Connor who said this, but someone said, if I knew where a book was going, why would I write it? And that's kind of my mantra when I write. But it can be frustrating because I just lay in bed some nights. Like right now, I've been stuck on the book I'm working on. I'm finally getting through that. But for a while, I was like, where is this going? What am I doing with it? And I just needed to get through the messy middle.
Well, speaking of where this is going, I was interested in the book. Again, this doesn't spoil anything, but it catches up with the present day. Well, you alluded to it earlier with Palm Springs. Was it important for you to always have that kind of long arc of a book? Was that difficult to manage, or had you considered not having a present day part of it, or was that a debate for you?
I kind of needed to have a prologue and bring it to the present day because Sherry goes on such a wild ride when she's working at the resort that I needed the reader to know that Sherry's okay, that she's going to make it through. I didn't want them to read the whole time getting, like, if you didn't know if she was going to be okay, the book would be that much, I don't know, it'd just be like teaching a kid to swim by throwing him in the water. It'd just be like really kind of tough. So I wanted to set that up. And I was just talking about this the other day, but I went to a reading, I can't remember the name of the writer, but somebody was talking about prologues, and there's a lot of debate about whether prologues should exist or not, but she said something that I found helpful when she said a prologue is great as long as the book answers all the questions that are brought up in the prologue. So after I wrote, I did write the prologue early, and then after I wrote that, I went back in and I was like, okay, am I hitting all the things that I'm teasing the reader, like these signposts that I want them to pay attention to? And it's kind of fun actually to go back and read a prologue after you finish a book, because you feel like you're like shaking hands with the puppeteer a little bit, like, oh, okay, now I get what you were trying to do to me by setting this up. And so that's, I like doing that. I like bringing it to the present. And
I love.
oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
One of the things that this book is really about, I mean, I think people might read about it and think that it's just about this wild ride with sex, drugs, and rock and roll that Sherry goes on. But really, to me, it's about getting older. And it's about, I met these women when I was working on the book, and they said, why don't people write about women our age? They were in their 60s. And they said, we're so interesting and we don't see ourselves in literature. And that was actually in my mind the whole time I was working on this book. I wanted to tell the story of what it's like to get older and how weird it is for me. I'm not in my 60s yet, but I can't believe how the past doesn't feel very far away, ever. It always feels like it's just, the things that I did when I was young feel like they just happened. It's so weird. Time just feels more like a ribbon than a straight line, like it feels like everything's near. So I wanted to think about how we punish ourselves and we do stupid things when we're young. I mean, maybe some people on this call are perfect and have never hurt anyone or made bad decisions, but like most of us have done that, especially in the age before social media. And how does that haunt us? And how do we reconcile what we've done?
Amen. When you find that out, well, actually, it's in the book. So people who like me wonder the answer to that question, just check out the book. I bet a lot of people listening actually also have another question, which is, I know a lot of people, I hear this at readings that I go to all the time, who are listening to this discussion. They know your story, that you just had that beautiful debut novel, now this one, and they're thinking, I've got a story inside me. I've got a story about a particular place that I know so well because I grew up there or I lived there a long time. I've got a place in my head, and I know there's a story I can tell about it that only I can tell, but I don't know how to tell it. What sort of advice do you give to fellow writers who are maybe embarking on their first project or want to get started? Something particularly something that's place based.
I think maybe starting the story, I mean, for me, it helps to start a story with characters. You know, my both my books are super character driven. And so what I think helps is you start putting characters who are fictional in a place you know. You know, I think sometimes people read my books and they think that because the characters can seem so real, they think they're actually real people, but they're not. Like they really are characters who I invent. And if you just start putting them into a place that you know and moving around through space and time, things start to happen. And I think also it's helpful when you want to tell a story to think of conflict. And you know, when I was in school with you, I never thought I'd be able to write a novel. But what helped me was I took a playwriting class. And when you have characters on a stage, I mean, I was a terrible playwright. I wrote the worst play ever written. But when you have characters on a stage, you realize they need to clash. They need to stand up and move around and do things. And I started trying to write scenes like that where characters are doing things and they're in conflict and they're expressing action. And that is, I think, what helped me break through and tell a story. And so if you just kind of follow your characters around, but it can take a really long time. So I think a lot of people think they're bad writers on that first draft because it's just so frustrating, but you just have to keep going and get into the headspace of what you're working on and just become totally immersed. Writing is a little bit like, yeah, don't you find writing is a little bit like reading? You know, like how you'll start a book and sometimes the first few chapters can seem kind of slow, but then suddenly it just clips along because you're in that world. And
Well, I don't know that experience because I've only read your books recently, so I've only been clipped along.
Oh.
But yes, no, absolutely. You never kind of, if one day out of 10 turns out to be the day that the muse comes and delivers you onto the next page, but you never. Who is it? Yale Doctorow? Daniel will know. Writing is like driving at night. You can only see as far forward as your headlights, but that's far enough. But you just have to keep driving. I think it's the other thing out of it, and just kind of keep going. Well, actually, this is before I turn over the mic. First I had to demonstrate that I did come with bunny ears today, so I was going to put them on for the show, but Christy said no, so we're disappointed. I also have a whole out. Yeah, under the shirt I have the whole outfit too, but that's fine. Next event. But Christy, so what's the favorite lightning round? What's your most favorite piece of writing advice, and what's your least favorite?
My favorite piece of writing advice. I wish I could think of something that you told me because you always gave me great advice. But the one that popped into my head was Rick Moody told me that I'm an over-explainer and that I need to cut the last sentence of every paragraph. And I've learned how to do that in my head before I write it down. So that helps a lot. You know, that phrase, trust your reader. It's really helpful. And what was your second question?
Your least favorite piece of writing advice, or the piece of writing advice you hate the least?
I'm so glad you asked that because this is also from Rick Moody. It totally screwed me up for a while because he said backstory is dead. Don't tell any backstory, just move a story forward. So for years I tried to do that. And then I realized like I can break that rule. I can use backstory. It's fine. And I understand though, even though that I felt like it kind of messed me up a little bit, it also helped because it made me think very carefully about when to use backstory, like when it can become really, like wet boots,
Oh, I love that. I love that. I think my favorite rule is that rules are made to be broken. So,
yeah.
And we may be breaking one by staying online too long and not letting other people ask questions. So I'm going to throw the floor open to people who have teed up questions. Daniel, do we have some people queued up, or should Christy and I talk a little bit more?
Actually, though, before we do questions, can I just do a little bit of show and tell?
Yes.
So I just wanted to say my mom made this sweater to go with the book cover. Isn't it so beautiful? And you can flip it upside down. So I just love it. And it's nice and summery. It's like a cotton weight. And for those of you who were on my last book launch, I had a sweater that my mom made. So I've been really excited to show off this beautiful work. Like, look isn't she amazing? She's just so talented. I hope she's on the call. And then I also have some bunny stuff. So Bunny Jojo let me borrow her costume. So I thought I'd show you guys. Isn't that wild? Like,
Wow.
I don't know if you can see it, but on the inside, those are all the corsets. And she said that these stays in the back, and they're really hard. She said if it was just cut wrong for you, it would actually cause kidney infections because it would like stab you in the kidney. And like, look at the shelf is like, can you hear that? It's like there's stuff in there to keep the bust bigger. And then here's her name is Pam, but you can only have one person with that name at the resort. Like you can never have two names. Like that's actually part of a scene in the book, as you'll see. So she was Bunny Jojo, and it just says Joe. And I just love this. It's so wild. I was looking at it and I was like, gosh, she wore this like for 4 years, you know, and they would get 2 costumes that they'd switch between. And then I have an actual bunny tail, and I want to show you guys. So isn't that huge?
That's so great.
As big as my head. So it's really big, and it's it's just, and those are the little snaps that go on. So I was so this is our actual bunny tail. These are totally worth a ton of money. So they had a black market even in the day where they would be, you know, worth $100 in the black market.
Well, this is Bunny Jojo's retirement, so make sure you get it back to her.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's good that I'm on. I asked Lisa might come on too, but Liam is adjusting. Do not be disturbed. Liam is just adjusting his set. Why he thought I would know what a writer said about writing is beyond me. But because here's the truth about time. Yes, you're right. I'm a little older than you. Everything feels like it happened yesterday. But ask me anybody's names that it happened to, and I don't remember them. So it's like both at the same time.
Daniel, we think you know everything.
Oh, you do. Daniel does know everything.
And I'm going to tell you another thing about the past before we get into questions. I have been saving letters, various letters, for 40 something years, 30, 40 years. Like I just kept like when we had pen pals, and when I would go on a college trip or a high school, like we were writing to each other because we didn't know that one day we wouldn't have to do that. And one of them was a tell-off letter about something I did that was really awful. It was completely out of my memory, and now it's all I can think about.
You're just like Sherry Taylor.
I am Sherry Taylor.
So
I was the other model.
I love it that you're having a Sherry Taylor moment.
That's what we're copywriting it as.
Yeah.
I will.
You want me to ask questions, Daniel? I can't turn my video on.
Oh, well, that's disturbing. We'll do. Okay, why don't we alternate?
Okay. So do you want to start, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. Somebody was asking, Christy, if you had written the story chronologically, or if you were imagining it going back and forth in time. Allison had asked that.
I imagined it chronologically, and I write chronologically. I can never break out of that. I try sometimes, but I feel like there's like some thread that I'm gonna miss. So I thought of the story chronologically. I knew there was a prologue, and then I knew I was going to go back, and then I just wrote from there. And then it was kind of tricky getting back. I don't want to give away too much, but getting back into the present was a little tricky. And it just kind of naturally, it seemed like there was a certain point where I could turn the story back into the present. The problem is like, how much do you develop the present? You know, like which story is most important with a book like this? Is it when she's younger, or is it when she's older? So I tried to balance that.
I think that's a struggle a lot of, like when I'm reading, like, is this a framing device or are these dual narratives? You know, and I think you made it, there's no conflict in your story. I think we know what.
Yeah. You know what I was worried about though is the second home actually is kind of like that, where you have a present day prologue, and then it comes back. And I felt like that was cheating to do the same type of structure in 2 different books. But then I just said, you know, I'm just going to do it.
This is the Clancy thing.
It's the Clancy thing. Although my new book does not do that. So, but who knows? Maybe it will.
You'll give it to the editor and she's like, where's the frame?
Yeah.
Jim wrote noted that you taught at college and wrote short stories before novel writing. How was that process of transitioning from one to the other? Were you trying to write novels all along, or did you finally say, I'm ready?
I really loved writing short stories. And, I'm like, even it's funny, I'm wearing my mom's sweater because I think about a short story kind of like a sweater, it's so crafty, like everything has to hold and you can see it. You can see where there are mistakes. It can, I don't know, it just feels like it became this kind of like form that I became really comfortable with. I didn't really want to write a novel, but you're always told when you're a writer, like if you don't write a novel, you're not really a writer. And then I was also getting my PhD. And so Liam has seen some really bad stuff from me. And I'll just say, like, there was a deer with a life vest on in one scene of a failed story. But I wrote for my PhD, I had to write a novel. So I did, and I had to finish it because I'd gotten my job at Beloit College and I was hired as ABD, which means all but dissertated. So I had to finish it. So I wrote really quickly, and I handed it in and I just had this gut feeling. I mean, it was enough to get my PhD. Thank you, Liam. But it didn't have much of a plot. Like it didn't have like a heart to it. It was just a story, and I knew it was maybe potentially going to be better if I worked on it some more. And then one of my friends said, your second book often becomes your first. And I don't know why I found that so liberating. I just thought, well, I can work on something different. And then he also was saying, my first book was set in a place I didn't like very much. And he said, write about a place you love instead of a place you don't love. And that's when I started writing about Wellfleet and, and Milwaukee. And so that became the second home. And that story, it just took a really long time for me to work on it. But a friend of mine was in television and she'd written for shows. And she said, just think more about each chapter and how each chapter can move the story along and it should have a purpose. And for some reason, that just helped me so much with writing a novel. So that's how I was able to turn the second home into a novel. Like it just gave it more action, I think. And then it was definitely hard writing Shoulder Season, but I felt like it came together a little better because I'd already written a book. Like it gave me a little bit of confidence to think, okay, I did this, it's really hard, but let's just see what happens.
Lisa, you're back. I think
I'm back. So Lauren Fox has asked, how did you approach the subject matter as a feminist? She's really interested in the resistance you encountered to the idea of Sherry as a valid protagonist with emotional depth.
Lauren, why are you asking me hard questions?
This is a good question.
Lauren's in her writing group and her book Send For Me is up here. It's amazing. Well, that's a really interesting question because I was like, I women's studies classes and, I marched in the Pussy Marches and I, did the Take Back the Night marches when I was in college. And it was really hard for me to write this. I actually stopped writing for a while because I thought I should have an opinion. I was like halfway through and I was like, boy, this sounds like it's pro Playboy. And I don't know if I can do that. I should maybe decide. And then I kind of like at a certain point, I was like, I'm so arrogant thinking that I can have a decision about this. Like that I need to decide. Who am I to decide? The only reason I wasn't a Playboy bunny in 1981 is because I wasn't old enough and I didn't live near the Playboy Resort and have the same kinds of experiences that Sherry did. And I thought if I went back in time and I was confronted with the same limited opportunities for other jobs, I would have done that job for sure. It's like way more fun to do that than, I talk about the different options available to Sherry at the time. Like 1981, the minimum wage is really bad. They could work at Trent Tube stamping metal, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you're able to get a job at the Playboy Resort and make $800 a day, working in the back room and have a lot of friends and live in a dorm, I totally would have done that. And I think people are so hard on women. These women never woke up one day and said, today I'm going to perpetuate the patriarchy. But, they were just trying to get by. They wanted to make money and maybe the system wasn't a great system, but they tried to exploit it. And I started thinking, we should be more critical of the men who have those you know, who go to the resorts and feed into that system more than the women. And I'm just kind of shocked too at how stigmatized Playboy bunnies are, you know, and it's interesting. Nobody's ever written a literary fiction novel about Playboy bunnies that I know of. Maybe you guys have seen books in your store that have been about that, but what, you know, these are valid experiences that women had. And why don't we write about them? And why are people so quick to dismiss them or think that a book about a Playboy bunny is going to be too light, you know, or fluffy? That my book's pretty gritty and it actually gets pretty dark. There's a lot of depth to it because our lives are complicated. And I don't know. I thought it wasn't fair to not. I like the idea of like presenting, like Lauren's blurb for the book is she says, Clancy illuminates the Playboy bunny's inner life with all the richness and complexity she deserves. And I love that blurb because that's what I was trying to do.
First of all, I just want to say, I feel like I'm on a CNN like show with the Secondly, I would like to say that I think Gloria Steinem's been working on her Playboy bunny novel for 50 years. Not quite done yet. And thirdly, I'd like to just, if I may ask a question, that ties into what you just said. One of the things that came to my mind when I was reading this book was the hypocrisy of the Playboy Resort and of the men who were involved in it. The constant insistence that this was a family resort and the revelation that there were a lot of things going on that were not family friendly at all. Was this something that you picked up from your research, maybe from Playboy? You know, maybe JoJo wouldn't say that, so a different bunny that will remain nameless. Or is it something that you wrote into the story from your feminist background?
You mean the stuff that went on that was not quite so.
And the way, I mean, I feel like it doesn't just happen. It's very clearly happening. It almost becomes, you know, this sort of hypocrisy, the contradictions. It's to me, it happens more than once. You know, it's not like it's just like, well, that was a surprise.
Yeah. Well, first
I
of all,
never said that.
yeah, and for some women, it truly was a pretty chaste experience. You know, there was actually a point where I was like, I don't have enough material to make this book. You know, because I kept talking to people about all the rules, and like, you know, Pam told me about one of her friends brought her sewing machine. I actually put that in the book. You know, and she would just go and sew at night when she wasn't working. And you know, for some people, it really was like that. But I do think that you're right that there were, you know, one thing that's kind of gross, I think, about Playboy is I had read that there were at the clubs more than the resort, but it would have worked there, that there were certain special keys given out just to some men. And when they would present the key, it meant that like generally the women were told they couldn't sleep with any of the patrons. But if they had this special kind of key, because they were like way up in management, that they would be able to, that the women were basically told like, then you need to do that. But I don't know, I never heard of that ever happening at the resort. But I also think like of a lot of the jobs I've had that weren't at a Playboy resort where, you know, bad stuff was going on behind the scenes. You know, you can work anywhere. Like I worked at a Dairy Queen and there was stuff going on in the freezers, you know, like when we were working. So I don't know. I felt like in any job, it could be like that a little bit, but there was hypocrisy. And I think, but I think also that they couldn't, I don't know. I keep thinking of Hefner, how he kind of played a sleight of hand. You know, he knew that he couldn't get away with a resort like that unless he labeled it a family resort. Yet part of his overall mission was, which I actually appreciate, was to destigmatize sex, you know, and just say it's okay. So he's trying to do both those things at the same time. And so I think the hypocrisy was actually built into the entire project.
I, for one, really liked how the men were very I mean, the men of this book are very much to the side, and the spotlight is on Sherry and her friends and the female and what they're able to create.
Yeah, and I think also like Sherry is exposed, actually kind of in the second home, it's the same thing. She meets all different kinds of characters when she's there, and some seem like they're, I can't really talk too much about them because a lot of them change as you're reading, and some that seem like they're good turn out to be not so good, and vice versa. So I kind of wanted to show that men are complicated too. You know, I'm not just trying to redeem like and show that the women were complicated who worked there and were worth study, but the men too, they had different reasons for being there, and men aren't straw men, like they were part of their culture. Maybe they felt weird about going. I'd like to think that I try to create fully rounded, nuanced men in the book.
You did. Not that I know, but I thought so.
So I have a question from Ames. You write so powerfully about people and water. Can you say more about the importance of lakes for you as a person and as a writer? And in parentheses, she says, plus you and your books rock.
Aw, thanks, Ames. Ames McGinnis is also part of our amazing writing group. We could have a whole Zoom just about our writing group. We should do that, Daniel.
I'm working on it.
Yeah. What do you think, Lisa? We'll get a group together. But yeah, I do write about water a lot because I'm always around water. I love to swim. I love to paddleboard. We were just in Cape Cod, and whenever we go to all the different ponds, and we always swim across the pond, which is just really fun. It's funny because there's a book that's out that's really big that came out the same day as mine called Paper Palace, and that's set on one of the ponds in Wellfleet. And I guess there's a line where one of the characters doesn't like it when the tourists come and they swim across the pond and they get near their raft. I haven't read it yet, but I was like, oh wait, that's me, like I'm that person swimming to other people's rafts and ponds. And I wish everyone had an opportunity to be near water a lot, because I think it's as my mom's friend says, it's cheaper than a therapist.
We have, I think it's Sarah. Difference between writing under pressure and not under pressure, difference between writing the first two books.
Yeah, I mean, writing under pressure was the hardest part about it is that I got a concussion right when I was starting. So I walked into a door one night, it was dark, and I didn't see that I'd left my closet door open. And I got like horrible tinnitus in my ear, like my ear rang all the time. And for a while it looked like words were floating on the page. And before that I was like, oh, I'll be able to do this, no problem. And then suddenly I really had to just stop for a while. And I was terrified I wouldn't meet my deadline, but it was actually great to write under a deadline. And I don't think I sacrificed any quality. I actually feel really good about Shoulder Season. I felt like if I didn't like it, I would have asked my editor if we could just not publish it. Like I wouldn't want to go out with a book I didn't feel good with just to meet a deadline. So I liked having that deadline. I could spend a day not writing easily. So it kind of forced me. And you know what, during COVID, it was so much better to write than to spare. I had to write.
Yeah. So what was the main differences between writing the two different books? Did you feel any big differences in the process or experiences? The exciting parts?
That's a really good question. I think, one thing I loved about writing both of them that's the same is that they were in places I liked being in my mind, because I really inhabit the world of my characters and I'm writing, and I liked that. Being in Wellfleet, being in East Troy, I could make it summer when it was winter, and also I was as disturbed as everyone by a lot of the politics and the tenor and world events. And I wanted to be able to create a world that I could escape into that wasn't too horrible and dark, but was still real. And so I like doing that. I think the difference was that I think I was better the second time around about letting my characters misbehave. I think it's hard to put your characters in jeopardy. My nephew keeps wanting me to name one of my characters after him. And I'm like, I can't do that because I'm going to do bad things to this character probably. I don't know what it'll be, but I think I put my characters more in jeopardy and at risk more easily now. I can kill a character. It's easier to kill characters now.
3 different ways. So.
Yeah.
Tess wants to know if you imagined a specific audience for the book while you're writing it. Who are you writing the book for?
Oh, that's so great. Well, my favorite line is from Lauren Fox. She always says, I once asked her, who do you write for? And she said, I write for someone just like me, but a little smarter. And I really did think about that. One thing that's hard about writing a second book after you have a first book out and like writing it while the book is out is your book is being like, my first book was being received. Like suddenly I had readers and I was hearing from them, and I try not to go and look at the reviews, but sometimes you just do, or like people will email you or say things, and you suddenly become like, you want to write the perfect book. You want to write a book everyone's just going to love, you know, and I had to just kind of shut the voices of other readers down after a while and think, this has just got to be my own project. And in some ways, after a while, you become less sensitive to that, and you think, well, I just need to like it. As long as I like it, and as long as my editor and the people that I trust and care about, like they think it's, in my writing group, thinks it's going in the right direction, you know, that's what I need to go with. So it was maybe a little more liberating to try not to write for that audience. But I think a lot of writers fall into the trap where they feel like they need to write something that's going to sell really well. But I made myself think like, I can't worry about sales. Like that's for marketing and promotions people. And if maybe they'll think this, I didn't know if they'd received a book about a Playboy bunny in Wisconsin in 1981. Like if they think that's never going to sell, it's nothing like your first book. But, you know, I'm glad I wasn't too preoccupied worrying about whether it would sell or not.
Liam, do you have another question?
I was going to say that I was going to ask very selfishly, like if you believe in not writing programs, but well, could we expand this to writing groups? Do you believe in like classrooms and seminars and settings, but also having a group to write with, or do you? Well, I'm loading the question, aren't I? Or do you believe in like writing all on your own?
Well, I kind of think you need to do both. You know, I feel like I'm a social person, you know, like it's killing me not to be able to have all these like live events and stuff, because I like that. I get a lot of energy from being around other people. But honestly, like it's just the hard work of being by yourself. Like you just have to do it. You have to sit in the chair and be by yourself and like really put the hard work in. But our writing group is so helpful. You know, it's really nice when you can throw something at you, and you guys will be honest, you know, when there's something that's not working, or maybe find something offensive. It's nice to have readers who've read your work a long time who kind of can know like, well, you can do better than this, or you know, or this is great and this is ready to go. You know, it just makes me feel more confident. And also I think I just had a class in Cape Cod at Castle Hill Center for the Arts, and you know, teaching is so and being in classes, it just gets it gets your skin in the game again. Like it makes you excited and motivated. And I was so moved by the people in the class that I taught, especially, you know, it's kind of fun when you have adults who are, you know, working so hard and they're not trying to get a grade or anything. They're just doing it because they really care about telling their stories. And I walked away from teaching that class feeling 100 times more like I wanted to work on my third book than I did before I went. You know, it made me feel like there's like a seriousness to writing, and like it matters, and you want to do it well, and to not think like I just need to get another book done. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just going to say that it's so easy to complain about writing. Not that I myself have ever complained about writing in the writing life, but
Oh.
I think it was T.C. Boyle or several writers reminded me, including my wife, that like we get to do this, and that I think as Jane Smiley also said, writers write. So as long as you've written that day, then you're kind of a writer. I think it's a beautiful gift. And when I read books as beautiful as yours, I'm reminded of what's possible too. But it is just like, it's wonderful to kind of step back, as you were saying, with those students in the classroom at Cape Cod, or the ones that I still have in Curtin Hall, 15 years after we waved goodbye to you. It's still amazing to see what they come up with every day. My favorite part of my website is where I brag about former students, and I love it. Each year I add a few more book covers to that list. And I'm going to add a couple more this year. And it's a beautiful thing. It's an amazing thing to kind of see an imagination burst full flower into the world like that. And to see another writer kind of say, I'm going to take the conversation that you all have been having and I'm going to extend it and bring it forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really exciting for me to be there. That's where, I'll end as I started, which is I've learned so much from you. I've learned so much from this conversation. I've learned a lot about book selling from Daniel and Lisa, but I've learned a lot about writing from you and the other members of my group. So I'm very grateful for that.
Oh yeah, and vice versa. I love teaching. I mean, it's sad. I love teaching at Beloit College. I miss it a lot. I couldn't have written this last book as quickly as if I was still there. But the students just so inspire me. They all have such amazing stories. And like, what's better than having a student read a story they've never read before and then get so excited about it and come to your office and say like, I keep thinking of Cathedral, and The Blind Man, and you're like, yes, or it's so exciting. It's so nice to pass that on. I'm like this sounds I don't mean to sound condescending when I say this at all, but I remember when my kids were in kindergarten and one of their teachers said, I just want students to love learning. That's all I want to accomplish. I don't care if they meet all the goals of the lessons. I just want them to love learning. And when I was a pretty easy teacher, like for grading, because I really did think, I just want them to love books. I want them to love reading. I want them to be able to underline a sentence and like go, oh, this is so great. Like that was my goal when I taught.
Amen to that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, Lisa and I can vouch that it's the two of you and all the other writers that we love. We heard so much in the past year that you are what got them through the year. It was so many of our folks, that was the thing that they did, and that was the highlight. So
COVID has it was horrible, but I do think it brought people back to reading a lot. And, I was just saying before the call started, it was fun, having a book set in East Troy, and there's a bookstore there also, Inklink. And I was signing books, and I've signed books for a bunch of people who told me like, I've never had an author sign a book before, and it's just, it's fun to think of this whole book community that we take for granted sometimes because we're in it, and how it's so great for people to explore books and get excited about reading again.
Amen.
Yep.
So I promised we would end the event at 8 so that people could watch a Bucks game. But Christy, do you have any closing words? Yes.
I just want to add one quick thing, and that's if you want to have a book signed or personalized to somebody, it's really easy for me to get to Books and Company and to Boswell. So if you just call and leave a note, and I can go and I can personalize it. If you have like a birthday gift and you want to, make it out to someone special, or have me make it out to them, or write a little note, I'm happy to do that.
And don't forget, Second Home is in paperback now. So if you're coming to this book, the second book first, don't worry, it's not a sequel, and you can go back and read the first book. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Liam. We are so grateful for you doing the conversation. Thanks, Christy. Continued success. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Daniel.
My partner in crime in literary. This is no crime.
This is no crime.
And the only crime is how good you write. Thank you all for coming. We wouldn't have bookstores without you.
Thank you.
Bunnies,
Thank you.
ears.
Bye.
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 Thank you.